Everybody, welcome back to the NC State Insider Podcast. I'm your host and lead beat writer for NC State on SI, Tucker Sennett, joining you here today to talk some Wolfpack football in the days following NC State's loss to Virginia Tech, a real disappointing outcome for this 2025 NC State team and head coach Dave Doran. It's been a really difficult week for this program as defensive coordinator DJ Elliott had to step away from the program temporarily after he lost his daughter to a lengthy battle against cancer. Really emotional few days for this program. And they're just sort of trying to battle a lot of things both on and off the field. And that sort of all came to a head in this Virginia Tech game. Um, and it's caused a lot of discussion about amongst fans about Dave Doran's potency and effectiveness as the NC State coach moving forward. And that's a much bigger conversation than the one we're going to have today, which is can this Wolfpack team still make a bowl game? Before we kind of debate this, and the way I'm going to structure it is I'm going to give you the reasons why I think they can, and I'm going to give you the reasons why I think they can't. And then at the end, I'll give you my guess, which really means nothing in the grand scheme of things because it's college football. Nobody knows anything at the end of the day. Um, but the facts as they stand are this team is 3-2 going into a week 6 matchup against FCS opponent Campbell. Um, those losses came obviously this week to Virginia Tech and Duke. And I think going into the season, a lot of people thought, there was a serious chance that this team could be going into the road trip in 2 weeks to Notre Dame with an undefeated 6-0 record, or at the very worst 5-1. And then especially that feeling grew after the 3-0 start to the season, and even after that Duke loss, given everything that happened to the Virginia Tech program in the last 2 weeks with Brent Pry getting fired and Philip Montgomery becoming the interim head coach. And, you had players leaving and redshirting to preserve eligibility. That program was a mess entering this game, and they flat out outplayed NC State in some critical areas. They beat them on the lines of scrimmage. Dave Doran was pretty adamant about that in his both post-game press conference and his Monday press conference. He was really disappointed in his team's effort in the trenches, both offensively and defensively, and then missed tackles really probably cost the Wolfpack this game. They really struggled to make tackles in key moments and gave up some explosive plays, which allowed Virginia Tech to go down to the field and score. So that's where we're at currently, that's where NC State is at. And moving forward, let's dive into the reasons why I think they can make a bowl game. They're still they need to win 6 games. That's bowl eligibility. That's a given. So you still have two very winnable games left on this schedule with next week against Campbell and then the season finale against North Carolina. Everything in between that is pretty difficult. And I'll get into that stretch a little bit and when I talk about the reasons this team can't make a bowl game. But NC State showed already that it's capable of beating a talented opponent at home. They have an opportunity to play against two more high quality opponents at Carter Finley Stadium, and the Wolfpack already beat Virginia in that week 2 non-conference matchup in Raleigh. Virginia has gone on to show that they're a very real contender in the ACC. Chandler Morris looks like an absolute gunslinger at quarterback, and they're very much in the mix in the ACC. The two teams that are coming in are probably a little bit better than Virginia. Maybe not. One of them just lost Virginia head to head, which I'll talk to. Does that game go differently if that game's in Tallahassee? We'll get to that. But it's going to come down to NC State being able to steal a win. And I think given those matchups at home, they can do that. They're capable of that, but it's going to be difficult to get that sixth win. Another reason why I think this team has a chance to make a bowl game is I do think this offense has another gear it can go to. We've seen it for moments and for quarters. CJ Bailey can can be an elite quarterback for this team, and Hollywood Smothers is one of the best running backs in the ACC. If they can get consistent offensive line play for an entire game against one of these top opponents, they're capable of pulling this off just on the back of their offense, given all the defensive efficiencies um, going on that side of the ball. And then the final reason I think NC State can make a bowl game still is there's always chaos in the ACC. It happens every year. A team that has no business beating one another contender ends up hosting them or going in there, catching them off guard and getting a win. It happens every year. Just look at what Wake Forest just did this past weekend to Georgia Tech. They had them basically done, and then a horrible call ended up shifting that game, and Georgia Tech walks out of Winston-Salem with a 1 point win and preserves their ranked status. But their 5-0 start is certainly starting to lose some of its luster given what's happened to Clemson, and that complete collapse. But you can win these games at home. Wake Forest proved that, and they almost beat NC State. They were up 10 points at the half, and the Wolfpack came roaring back and took that game over. So we've seen this team face adversity already. There's also the you know, you can argue that this Virginia Tech game and this Duke game flipped on a couple plays. The response to that would be you very well could have lost to Virginia, you very well could have lost to East Carolina, you very well could have lost to Wake Forest, and those games went right for the Wolfpack. So there's no way of nitpicking how those things would go, but the Wolfpack had a very real chance to be 6-0. They really weren't blown out. That Duke game was closer than the final score indicated. So yeah, I mean that this team is still talented. The offense is very potent, and they can find a way to win 3 games here or not. Here's why I think they might not have a chance to get to 6 wins this season. There's literally no room for error at this point because of the schedule, because of the loss to Virginia Tech. You put yourself into as tight a corner as you possibly could have if you're Dave Dorn. You can't afford to lose that game against North Carolina, which is a rivalry game against Bill Belichick. Who knows what that team's going to look like by the end of the season? Will they have guys opting out? Will they sort of have things turned around by then once they get into ACC play? It's a total mystery with them. They might make a move at quarterback. Who knows? So that's a game that is still based on the performance of NC State over the last 2 weeks. I'm no longer as confident as I was. It's still a game that NC State should win if everything stays the way it is right now. But it goes back to my opinion that the ACC is complete chaos, and things happen in college football, whether that's injuries or just a flat performance. It can happen. Back to injuries. The Wolfpack is dealing with a lot of injured players right now, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. They lost redshirt freshman safety Brody Barnhart on Saturday. We don't know what the extent of his injury is this season, but their injury report seems to get bigger and bigger each week, which is not a good sign. Dave Dorn would not elaborate on any additional injuries this week, but this team really can't afford to lose the healthy defenders that it does have because they're on the verge of having to dip into, their third stringers at some positions, and some really young players who are inexperienced, who are not going to be ready for these opponents in this grueling stretch, which is my last reason NC State cannot make a bowl game. After Campbell, the opponents look like this. You are at Notre Dame, facing the Fighting Irish, a ranked team that basically has to win every single game the rest of the season to ensure that it is in the college football playoff. This is an offense that scored 40 points in three of its four games, I believe, and has was very much on the precipice of beating the ACC's best team, Miami, and just couldn't get the job done at the end, and then lost a tight one to Texas A&M, and that's your two losses. So those are two top 10 teams that Notre Dame has lost to this season. Then you're on the road against Pitt, a very solid ACC team that's having sort of similar issues to NC State, losing a couple close ones to their rival West Virginia, which was kind of a disappointing outcome for them. And then they blew a big lead against Louisville this past weekend. That's, that game goes differently, and Pitt is looking like more of a contender in the conference and Louisville is looking more like the pretender. Pitt's got a really talented quarterback in Eli Holstein, who's more of a traditional pocket passer. NC State's done okay against that kind of quarterback. They've really only seen one this season in Caden Hauser at ECU, and they really neutralized the run game, and just made him make plays. That's not going to work against Holstein because he is a very good pocket passer and can make you pay if you do that. Then you have a home matchup, one of the games that, if you get lucky, you have a chance to win against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech just had that stumble against Wake Forest, but they survived. I just don't see a world where NC State's defense, given its current state, and you're only going to get more banged up over the course of a season, is able to handle Haynes King and Georgia Tech. In fact, they lost to Georgia Tech last year without Haynes King. So the way that Georgia Tech plays is so bad for this NC State defense. They have a mobile quarterback. They want to grind you out and force you to tackle in the open field with their option plays and their zone reads and things like that. And this NC State team has been just the tackling has just been an absolute mess this season. They've missed 48 tackles. Georgia Tech's defense isn't lighting the world on fire. They're actually leading the ACC in missed tackles, but it's a solid enough defense that it could give CJ Bailey some frustration. It is a home game, so I'm not counting out NC State entirely, but that's going to be a really difficult one to win given the potency of this Yellow Jacket offense. You follow that up with a road trip to Miami to face one of, in my opinion, the three best teams in the country. Miami is loaded on both sides of the ball. A lot of people were worried about Carson, myself included, were worried about Carson Beck coming in there, his leadership and ability to play at a school not named Georgia. And he's certainly proved that there's no problems. He's got a tremendous offensive line in front of him, giving him time to hit some very talented pass catchers. He's got a nice stable of running backs behind him, so they can beat you both ways offensively. And then their defense, their pass rush is just unbelievable, led by Ruben Bain. They have some grown men on that defense. It's been a total turnaround for that unit for Miami from a year ago, where they couldn't get off the field in some of their biggest games, and that's ultimately what kept them out of the college football playoff. Nightmare matchup for NC State. Maybe you go down there and you catch Miami sleeping, but this is not one I see any chance of winning for the Wolfpack. And then you come home, you got a short week game, a Friday night matchup against Florida State. Florida State has historically struggled in Raleigh in Carter Finley Stadium. They've had some devastating losses that have messed up their seasons over the years in Carter Finley. They're coming off that Friday night loss to Virginia that I mentioned earlier, so they can be got. we don't really know how they're going to bounce back. They play Miami this week, so we'll see what they look like against another ranked opponent, is what I'm trying to say. That's maybe one NC State can hang on and escape with a win. I just if you're counting on beating Florida State, Georgia Tech, or Miami, that's going to be really hard to do. I just it looks hard, and then you finish with that home game against North Carolina, which should be a win if all things go well. And Dave Doran has had UNC's number over the last few years. He's got a pretty lengthy winning streak going back against them. So we'll see if they can find a way to pull one of those off, but it certainly doesn't look good in that stretch. My final guess on whether NC State can make a bowl game, I don't think so. I think it's more likely that you're going to suffer more on the defensive side of the ball in terms of availability and the way that this defense has played the last couple of weeks is really concerning and there's all this talk about playing a complete game going into that Duke game, and things got worse against a more potent offense in Duke. And they're only going to play better offenses the rest of the way, really, outside of North Carolina. I think every team on that list is capable of lighting it up on that side of the field. And, now there's some issues offensively with the pass protection against Virginia Tech. That was a nightmare. CJ Bailey got sacked 4 times, or 4 times in the first half, 5 times on the game. So that was really problematic for NC State. And it's just that stretch doesn't seem like one that NC State can dig into and steal a game in with the way the team looks right now. That could change. Things happen with other teams too. Some of these teams could fall apart in the next couple of weeks. Who knows what Florida State will look like by November or late October, maybe that game is. Um, so that's something to consider, certainly, and we'll see what happens there. But it's less of an indictment on Dave Doran and his leadership of this program, because I do think, given the talent that's on this roster or lack thereof in some areas, there's not that much he could be doing to change these things. Obviously, that you can blame his recruiting or the roster construction. If you want to blame that on him, go for it. But I'm not gonna sit here and stop you or advocate for you. I just think it's hard to pin that on one person. And I think the injuries have contributed to the last 2 weeks pretty significantly. So it's more a realization of just how difficult this schedule turned out, and the fact that NC State didn't do what it needed to and didn't get to 5 wins going into that Notre Dame game to basically guarantee a bowl, or give itself the best possible chance of reaching a bowl game. So now they're in a really tedious position, and I wrote about it today as well, so you can check that out for a little more detail. But this is not where this program wanted to be. And now Dave Doran already addressed it today, but there's going to be questions from fans about his job security, and that's something that they're going to have to deal with the rest of the way because of this Virginia Tech loss. That's all I got today for the NC State Insider Podcast. As always, thanks for tuning in. And you can follow me on X at Senate Tucker. You can follow the website on X at Wolfpack on SI. You can find more episodes of the NC State Insider Podcast on the Sports Videos on SI YouTube channel. And we'll see you tomorrow for another episode. Later.